The woman stumbling off the stagecoach in Presidio, Texas, had eyes that told Nathan Sawyer she'd seen things no person should ever have to witness. And he knew that look because he'd carried it himself for far too long. It was mid-August in 1878, and the heat rose from the dusty streets in shimmering waves that made everything look like a fever dream. Nathan had been leaning against the post outside the general store, rolling a cigarette between his weathered fingers when the stage pulled in. He'd been expecting supplies, not trouble. But trouble was exactly what stepped down from that coach in the form of a slender woman with auburn hair escaping from beneath a plain bonnet, and a carpetbag clutched so tightly in her gloved hands that her knuckles showed white even through the fabric. She stumbled on the last step, and Nathan found himself moving before his brain caught up with his body. He caught her elbow, steadying her, and when she looked up at him with those wide green eyes, he felt something shift in his chest that he'd thought was permanently locked away. "Thank you," she said, her voice soft but strained, like a violin string pulled too tight. She pulled away from his touch quickly, nervously glancing back at the stage as if expecting someone to follow her out. "You all right, miss?" Nathan asked, keeping his distance but not moving away entirely. He was 32 years old and had learned to read people the way some men read books. This woman was terrified. "Yes, I'm fine. I just need to find somewhere to stay. Is there a boarding house in town?" Nathan nodded toward the two-story building across the street. "Mrs. Patterson runs a respectable place. Clean rooms, decent meals. You planning on staying in Presidio long?" The woman's jaw tightened. "I don't know yet, maybe. Is that a problem?" "No problem at all," Nathan said easily, tipping his hat. "Just making conversation. Name's Nathan Sawyer. I run cattle about 5 miles north of town. If you need anything, most folks around here know where to find me." She hesitated, clearly weighing whether to give him her name. Finally, she said, "Teresa. Teresa Grant." The lie was obvious in the slight pause before her last name, but Nathan didn't call her on it. Whatever she was running from was her business. He'd come to Texas to escape his own demons, and he understood the need for a fresh start better than most. "Well, Miss Grant, welcome to Presidio. It's not much, but folks here mind their own business for the most part." Something flickered in her eyes that might have been relief or might have been hope. She nodded once and started across the street toward the boarding house, her stride purposeful despite the obvious exhaustion in her shoulders. Nathan watched her go, then glanced at the stagecoach driver who was hauling bags down from the top of the coach. "She travel alone, Charlie." Charlie Norton had been driving the stage route between El Paso and Presidio for 15 years and knew everything worth knowing about everyone who passed through. He spit tobacco juice into the dust and wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. "Got on in El Paso 3 days ago. Kept to herself, barely ate. Jumped every time we stopped. Whatever she's running from, it's got her spooked real good." Nathan nodded slowly, his eyes still on the boarding house door where Teresa had disappeared. "Anyone asking after her?" "Not yet. But I got a feeling someone will be eventually." "That kind of scare doesn't come from nothing." Nathan finished rolling his cigarette and lit it, taking a long drag while he thought. He'd come to Presidio 7 years ago with nothing but a broken heart and a determination to build something that was entirely his own. The ranch had grown from a rough cabin and a dozen head of cattle to a proper spread with a solid house, good grazing land, and a small crew of men he trusted with his life. He'd built a life here, a quiet life, and he'd learned to be content with his own company. But something about Teresa Grant made him want to break his own rules about staying uninvolved in other people's problems. He spent the rest of the afternoon handling his business in town, ordering supplies and talking to the blacksmith about a new plow blade, but his mind kept drifting to the woman with the haunted eyes. When he finally headed back to his ranch, as the sun was starting to sink toward the horizon, painting the desert sky in shades of orange and purple, he couldn't shake the feeling that his quiet life was about to get complicated. Teresa Grant stood at the window of her small room on the second floor of Mrs. Patterson's boarding house and watched the town settle into evening. The room was simple but clean, just as the cowboy had said. A narrow bed with a patchwork quilt, a washstand with a chipped porcelain basin, a small dresser, and a chair by the window. It was more than she'd hoped for and less than she'd once had. She pressed her forehead against the glass and closed her eyes, trying to quiet the panic that had been her constant companion for the past 2 weeks. She'd left St. Louis in the middle of the night with nothing but the clothes on her back and what little money she'd managed to save without Victor noticing. Every mile between her and that city felt like a gift, but she knew better than to think she was truly safe. Victor Graham didn't let go of things he considered his property, and he'd made it abundantly clear over the 3 years she'd been his wife that she belonged to him absolutely. The bruises hidden beneath her long sleeves and high collar were testament to what happened when she dared to disagree with him. The broken rib that still ached when she breathed too deeply was a reminder of the night she'd suggested they might be happier apart. She'd married him when she was 18, fresh from the convent school where she'd been raised after her parents died of cholera when she was 7. Victor had seemed charming then, a successful merchant 20 years her senior who'd promised her security and a good life. She'd been too young and too desperate for a family to see the cruelty behind his smile. It had taken her 3 years to gather the courage and the means to leave. 3 years of learning to make herself small, to anticipate his moods, to hide money in the lining of her winter coat. 3 years of planning her escape while pretending to be the obedient wife he demanded. The marriage certificate in her carpet bag listed her as Teresa Graham, but she'd given Nathan Sawyer her maiden name, Grant. It was a small act of reclaiming herself, even if it wouldn't fool anyone who came looking with the right information. She moved away from the window and began unpacking her meager belongings. 2 dresses, a nightgown, undergarments, a hairbrush, and a small leather journal her mother had kept. Everything she owned in the world fit in one worn carpet bag, and somehow that felt appropriate. She was starting over, after all, building a new life from nothing. A knock on her door made her jump, her heart racing. She forced herself to breathe and opened the door a crack. Mrs. Patterson stood in the hallway, a kindly-faced woman in her 50s with gray hair pulled back in a neat bun. "Supper's in an hour, dear. We eat family style in the dining room downstairs. Nothing fancy, but it's filling." "Thank you," Teresa managed, hoping her voice didn't betray her fear. "I'll be down." Mrs. Patterson's sharp eyes took in Teresa's pale face and trembling hands. "You settling in all right? You need anything, you just let me know. I've got extra blankets if you get cold at night, and there's a good lock on your door." The last comment seemed pointed, and Teresa wondered what Mrs. Patterson saw when she looked at her. Could she see the desperation, the fear, the shame of being a woman who'd run from her husband? "I'm fine, thank you." Mrs. Patterson nodded but didn't move away immediately. "I've been running this boarding house for 20 years. Seen all kinds of people come through, some running to something, some running from something. I don't judge and I don't gossip. Whatever brought you to Presidio is your business. But if you need help, there are good people in this town." Teresa felt tears prick her eyes and blinked them back hard. She couldn't afford to break down, not now. "I appreciate that." After Mrs. Patterson left, Teresa sat on the bed and let herself cry for exactly 5 minutes. Then she washed her face in the basin, pinned her hair up properly, and went downstairs for supper. The dining room held 3 long tables with benches, and about a dozen people were already seated when Teresa entered. The conversations died down as everyone turned to look at the newcomer. She felt her cheeks flush, but kept her chin up and found a seat at the end of one table near a young couple who smiled at her kindly. The food was simple but good: roast chicken and potatoes with green beans and fresh bread. Teresa ate slowly, aware that she'd barely eaten in days and her stomach had shrunk. Around her, conversations resumed, the other boarders talking about their days, the weather, the upcoming town social. She was just beginning to relax when the door opened and Nathan Sawyer walked in. He nodded to various people, clearly a familiar presence, and Teresa's breath caught when his eyes found hers across the room. He didn't smile exactly, but something in his expression softened, and he made his way to her table. "Mind if I sit?" he asked. Teresa shook her head, not trusting her voice. He folded his long frame onto the bench across from her and accepted the plate Mrs. Patterson brought him with a grateful nod. "You don't live here," Teresa said, finding her voice. It came out more accusatory than she'd intended. "No, madam, I don't. But Mrs. Patterson makes the best chicken in the county, and I'm a bachelor who can't cook worth a damn. I eat here a few times a week." "Oh." Teresa focused on her plate, feeling foolish. They ate in silence for a few minutes before Nathan spoke again. "I don't mean to pry, but I was thinking you might need work. Mrs. Patterson mentioned you paid for a week but seemed concerned about making it stretch." Teresa's cheeks burned. "I have some money, I'll be fine." "I'm sure you will. But if you're looking to earn more, my ranch could use someone who can cook and keep house. My men are capable, but they're cowboys, not homemakers. The place is starting to look like a barn, and we've been living on beans and hardtack for too long." Teresa set down her fork and looked at him directly for the first time since he'd sat down. His face was weathered from years in the sun, with lines around his eyes that suggested he smiled more than he frowned, though he wasn't smiling now. His hair was dark brown, sun-streaked, and a bit too long. He had the broad shoulders and calloused hands of a man who worked hard for his living. His eyes were the color of whiskey, and they looked at her with something she couldn't quite identify. Not pity exactly, maybe understanding. "You don't know anything about me," she said quietly. "Why would you offer me work? Because you need it and I need help. Seems straightforward enough. What if I'm a terrible cook? Then I'll eat terrible food and my men will complain, but at least someone will be trying. What if I steal from you, will you? No. Then I guess that's not a problem." Teresa felt something loosen in her chest. "What if someone comes looking for me?" Nathan's expression hardened slightly. "Is someone likely to?" She wanted to lie, to say no, to pretend she was just a single woman traveling west for adventure like the heroines in dime novels. But something about Nathan Sawyer made her want to tell the truth. "Maybe. I don't know. I hope not." He nodded slowly, as if she'd confirmed something he'd already suspected. "If someone comes looking, they'll have to go through me first, and I'm not an easy man to go through." Teresa believed him. There was something solid about Nathan Sawyer, something that suggested he didn't make promises lightly but kept them absolutely. "I can cook," she said finally. "My mother taught me before she died, and the sisters at the convent school made sure I could run a household properly. I can clean, mend clothes, preserve food, all of it. When can you start? Tomorrow. Tomorrow's fine. I'll come by at first light with a wagon. The ranch is about an hour's ride north. You'll have your own room in the house, separate from where the men bunk. Meals and a salary, paid weekly so you can leave whenever you want." The last part felt important, and Teresa understood why he'd phrased it that way. He was offering her an escape route, making it clear she wouldn't be trapped. "Thank you," she whispered, and meant it with her whole heart. Nathan finished his supper and stood, tipping his hat to her. "See you in the morning, Miss Grant." After he left, Teresa sat for a long time staring at her empty plate. For the first time since she'd fled St. Louis, she felt something other than fear. It was small and fragile, but it might have been hope. The next morning dawned clear and hot, the kind of heat that would build throughout the day until the desert felt like an oven. Teresa was awake long before first light, her few belongings packed and ready. She'd barely slept, her mind racing with possibilities and fears in equal measure. What if she was making a mistake? What if Nathan Sawyer wasn't the decent man he seemed? What if Victor found her before she had time to figure out her next move? But when Nathan arrived just as the sun was breaking over the horizon, driving a sturdy wagon pulled by 2 horses, Teresa's doubts faded a bit. In the early morning light, he looked tired but steady, and when he helped her up onto the wagon seat, his hands were gentle. "Morning," he said, his voice rough from sleep. "You ready?" "As I'll ever be." They rode out of town in comfortable silence, the wagon wheels creaking and the horses' hooves clopping against the hard-packed earth. Teresa watched the landscape change as they traveled north, the desert giving way gradually to scrub grass and scattered trees. The land was harsh but beautiful in its own way, all wide skies and endless horizons. "What made you come to Texas?" Nathan asked after a while, breaking the silence. Teresa chose her words carefully. "I needed a fresh start, somewhere far from where I'd been. Makes sense. That's why I came too." "Where did you come from?" "Virginia, originally. Lost my family's farm during the war, lost a lot of things during the war." His voice was matter of fact, but Teresa heard the old pain underneath. "Came west looking for something that was mine, something no one could take away." "Did you find it?" He gestured at the land around them. "Building it. Some days it feels like I'm getting there. Others, I'm not so sure." Teresa understood that uncertainty perfectly. "How long have you been here?" 7 years. First few were lean. Lived in a 1-room cabin, barely had enough cattle to call it a herd. But the land's good and I worked hard. Got lucky a few times. Now I've got about 200 head of cattle, 4 good men working for me, and a house that doesn't leak when it rains. That sounds like success to me. Nathan glanced at her, something warm in his eyes. "I suppose it is. Never thought about it that way." The ranch came into view as they crested a low hill, and Teresa's first impression was that it looked solid. The house was a long, low structure made of adobe and wood, with a wide porch running along the front. Several outbuildings dotted the property: a barn, a bunkhouse, corrals for the horses and cattle. Everything was well maintained, practical rather than fancy, but clearly cared for. Nathan pulled the wagon up in front of the house and helped Teresa down. A man emerged from the barn, tall and lean with a weathered face and graying hair. "This is Diego Martinez," Nathan said. "Best foreman in Texas. Diego, this is Miss Teresa Grant. She'll be handling the cooking and housekeeping." Diego's dark eyes assessed Teresa with the same careful attention Nathan had shown when they first met. He must have decided she was acceptable because he nodded and said, "Welcome, Miss Grant. We are very glad you are here. Nathan's cooking has been trying to kill us for months." Teresa found herself smiling despite her nervousness. "I'll do my best to keep you all alive. That is all we can ask." Over the next hour, Nathan showed her around the house. It was larger than it had looked from outside, with a main room that served as kitchen and living area, 3 bedrooms, and even a small bathing room with a real tub. The furniture was simple but well made, and everything was covered in a layer of dust that suggested the men had been focused on outside work rather than housekeeping. "Your room," Nathan said, opening the door to the smallest bedroom. It held a bed with a real mattress, a dresser, a wardrobe, and a window that looked out over the eastern range. "It's not fancy, but it's clean and private." Teresa set down her carpetbag and looked around. The room was at least 3 times the size of her room at the boarding house, and the bed looked comfortable. More than that, it felt safe. The door had a good lock, and she was miles from town, miles from anywhere Victor might think to look. "It's perfect," she said honestly. Something in Nathan's expression eased. "Good. I'll let you settle in. Kitchen's got supplies, but if you need anything else, just make a list and I'll have Diego pick it up next time he goes to town. Supper's usually around 6, but we're flexible. The men work hard, so they eat a lot." "I can handle that." Nathan hesitated in the doorway, as if wanting to say something more. Finally, he just nodded and left, his boots echoing on the wooden floor. Teresa unpacked her things, which took all of 5 minutes, and then went to explore the kitchen. It was spacious and well-equipped, with a large cast iron stove, a good work table, plenty of pots and pans, and a surprisingly well-stocked pantry. Someone had clearly invested in supplies even if they didn't know how to use them properly. She found flour, salt, sugar, lard, dried beans, coffee, and even some canned goods. There was a root cellar stocked with potatoes, onions, and preserved vegetables. The men might not be fancy cooks, but they'd made sure they wouldn't starve. Teresa rolled up her sleeves and got to work. She started by scrubbing down the kitchen, which clearly hadn't seen a proper cleaning in months. Then she began preparing supper, deciding on fried chicken, mashed potatoes, gravy, and biscuits. It was simple, hearty food, the kind that would stick to a man's ribs after a long day of ranch work. As she worked, she felt some of the tension that had been her constant companion for weeks begin to ease. There was something meditative about cooking, about the familiar rhythm of chopping and stirring and kneading. Her hands knew what to do without her having to think about it. And for the first time in a long time, her mind quieted. She was just pulling the biscuits from the oven when the men started filing in for supper. Nathan came first, followed by Diego and 3 other cowboys who introduced themselves as Thomas, William, and Jesse. They were all young, probably in their early 20s, and they looked at the spread on the table like it was Christmas morning. "Madam, if that tastes half as good as it smells, we're going to build you a shrine," Jesse said, his eyes wide. Teresa felt her cheeks warm. "Just sit down and eat before it gets cold." The meal was eaten in appreciative silence, broken only by the occasional grunt of approval. Teresa found herself relaxing as she watched the men eat, pleased that her cooking was appreciated. When the last biscuit had disappeared, and the men were leaning back in their chairs looking satisfied, Nathan caught her eye and smiled. It was the first real smile she'd seen from him, and it transformed his face. He looked younger, lighter, and Teresa felt her heart skip in a way that had nothing to do with fear. "Miss Grant, that was the best meal we've had in longer than I can remember," Nathan said. "If you keep cooking like that, I'll have to pay you double to keep my men from trying to marry you." The comment was clearly meant as a joke, but Teresa saw the way the other men shifted uncomfortably, and she remembered that she was wearing a wedding ring. She'd thought about taking it off a dozen times since leaving St. Louis, but some combination of fear and habit had kept it on her finger. "I'm married," she said quietly, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. The easy atmosphere in the room changed, became more careful. Nathan's expression didn't change much, but something shuddered in his eyes. "Your husband know where you are?" he asked, his voice neutral. "No, and I'd like to keep it that way." Nathan nodded slowly, and Teresa saw understanding dawn on his face. "Then we'll make sure it stays that way. Anyone comes around asking questions, we haven't seen you." "Thank you." The men finished up and filed out, thanking her again for the meal. Nathan lingered after the others had gone, helping her clear the table despite her protests. "You don't have to tell me anything," he said as he carried dishes to the wash basin. "But if your husband is the kind of man a woman needs to run from, you should know that I meant what I said. You're safe here." Teresa felt tears threaten again and blinked them back. "Why are you being so kind to me? You don't know me. I could be lying about everything." Nathan was quiet for a moment, his hands stilling in the dishwater. "My sister married a man who hurt her. This was back in Virginia before the war. She tried to leave him once, but he found her and brought her back. She tried again, and he killed her for it." The words were spoken softly, but they hit Teresa like a physical blow. "I'm so sorry. She was 19 years old, sweetest person you'd ever meet. She deserved better than she got." Nathan turned to look at Teresa, his expression serious. "So when I see a woman who's running from something that scares her badly enough to leave everything behind, I figure I owe it to my sister's memory to help if I can." Teresa didn't know what to say. She crossed the kitchen and placed her hand over his where it rested on the edge of the wash basin. His skin was warm and rough, the hand of a man who worked hard. "Thank you," she whispered, "for helping me, for giving me a chance." Nathan's hand turned under hers, his fingers curling around hers briefly before he let go and stepped back. "You've got nothing to thank me for. You're working for your keep, same as anyone. Now you've had a long day. Why don't you get some rest? Morning comes early around here." Teresa wanted to argue, to finish the dishes, to do something to repay his kindness. But exhaustion was catching up with her, the adrenaline that had kept her moving for the past 2 weeks finally running out. She nodded and bid him good night, retreating to her small room. She locked the door behind her, a habit she couldn't break, and sat on the edge of the bed. For the first time since she'd fled St. Louis, Teresa allowed herself to think about the future rather than just the immediate need to survive. What would she do? She couldn't stay married to Victor, but divorce was scandalous and nearly impossible to obtain. She couldn't go back to St. Louis, but she couldn't hide in Texas forever either. The questions circled in her mind until exhaustion finally pulled her under into a dreamless sleep. The next few weeks fell into a comfortable rhythm that Teresa came to treasure. She woke before dawn and started breakfast for the men, usually eggs and bacon with fresh biscuits and strong coffee. They'd eat quickly and head out for their day's work, leaving Teresa to clean up and start planning the day's meals. She spent her mornings cleaning and organizing the house, which was in desperate need of a woman's touch. She washed curtains and beat rugs and scrubbed floors until everything gleamed. The men noticed and appreciated the changes, but Nathan seemed almost uncomfortable with how nice the house was becoming. "You don't have to work this hard," he said one afternoon when he found her on her hands and knees scrubbing the floor of the main room. "I hired you to cook, not to be a maid." Teresa sat back on her heels and pushed a stray strand of hair out of her face. "I like staying busy. It keeps my mind occupied." Nathan studied her for a moment, then nodded. "Fair enough. Just don't work yourself to death. That wouldn't do anyone any good." In the afternoons, Teresa would prepare supper and work on mending clothes or other household tasks. She was good with a needle and thread, and the men were grateful to have shirts and trousers repaired properly instead of their own crude attempts at stitching. The evenings were her favorite time. After supper, the men would often linger at the table, talking about their day, telling stories, playing cards. Teresa would sit with them sometimes, listening more than talking, letting the easy camaraderie wash over her. It was so different from her life in St. Louis, where Victor had controlled every aspect of her existence, where she'd been isolated from everyone except his business associates and their cold, judgmental wives. Here, She felt almost free. Nathan was always kind but careful with her, maintaining a polite distance that Teresa both appreciated and found frustrating. She caught him watching her sometimes, his expression thoughtful, but he never said anything inappropriate or made her feel uncomfortable. She found herself looking for him throughout the day, listening for his voice, feeling more settled when he was nearby. She told herself it was just because he made her feel safe, but deep down she knew it was more than that. Nathan Sawyer was a good man, the kind of man she'd thought didn't exist. He was strong but gentle, decisive but fair. He worked as hard as his men but never asked them to do anything he wouldn't do himself. He was patient with the horses and cattle, quick to laugh at a joke and slow to anger. And he was handsome in a rough, weathered way that made Teresa's heart skip whenever he smiled at her. But she was married, and Nathan respected that, even if her marriage was a sham and a prison she'd escaped. The ring on her finger might as well have been a wall between them. One evening about a month after Teresa had arrived at the ranch, a violent thunderstorm rolled in from the west. The men had been out checking on cattle in a far pasture when the clouds opened up, and they came back soaked to the skin and shivering despite the heat. Teresa immediately went into action, heating water for baths and making hot coffee while the men changed into dry clothes. Nathan was the last to come in, and he looked exhausted, his hair plastered to his head and his clothes dripping water all over the floor. "Go get dry," Teresa said, shooing him toward his room. "I'll have hot coffee ready when you come back." When Nathan emerged 15 minutes later in clean, dry clothes with his hair roughly toweled, Teresa had coffee waiting along with a plate of cookies she'd baked that afternoon. They were the only two in the house, the other men having already retreated to the bunkhouse. "You're going to spoil us," Nathan said, wrapping his hands around the hot mug. "You all work hard. You deserve to be taken care of." Nathan looked at her over the rim of his cup, his eyes serious. "You're happy here. You feel safe." "Yes to both. Why do you ask?" "Just want to make sure. You've been here a month now, and I want you to know that if you need to move on, I understand. But if you want to stay, you're welcome for as long as you like." Teresa felt warmth spread through her chest. "I'd like to stay if that's all right." "More than all right." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the rain hammer against the roof and the occasional rumble of thunder. Outside, lightning flashed, illuminating the room in brief, stark bursts. "Can I ask you something?" Teresa said finally. "Sure." "Why haven't you married, built a family of your own? You're not that old and you've got a good ranch, a good life." Nathan was quiet for so long that Teresa thought she'd overstepped. Then he said, "I was engaged once, back in Virginia before the war. Her name was Mary. We were going to get married in the spring of 1861, but then Fort Sumter happened and everything went to hell. I enlisted and she promised to wait. I believed her." He paused, taking a sip of coffee. "Fought for 4 years. Saw things no one should see. Did things I'm not proud of. Came home in 1865 to find out Mary had married someone else 2 years earlier. A man who'd paid to avoid the draft. Can't say I blamed her, but it hurt just the same. Then my sister died and my parents lost the farm, and I just wanted to get away from everything that reminded me of what I'd lost. So you came to Texas." "So I came to Texas. Figured I'd build something new, something that couldn't be taken away by war or death or a woman who couldn't wait. For a long time, I thought that meant not letting anyone get close. Easier to be alone than to risk that kind of pain again." Teresa understood that impulse perfectly. "But you're not really alone. You've got Diego and the other men. You've built something good here." "I have. But it's not the same as having someone to share it with, you know? Someone who's your partner, not just your employee or your friend." Nathan looked at her, and there was something vulnerable in his expression. You ever feel like you're going through the motions of living without actually being alive? Every day for the past 3 years, Teresa whispered. The admission hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Nathan reached across the table and covered her hand with his, the same gesture she'd made weeks ago, and Teresa felt the connection between them like an electric current. "You're alive now," he said. "You got away, you're safe. That takes courage. I don't feel very courageous. I feel like a coward who ran away instead of fighting." Sometimes running is the bravest thing you can do, especially when staying means dying, whether it's your body or your soul. Teresa turned her hand over under his, lacing their fingers together. It was improper and dangerous, and she knew she should pull away, but she couldn't make herself let go. Nathan's hand was warm and strong, and holding it made her feel anchored in a way she hadn't felt in years. "I want to be alive again," she said softly. "I want to feel things without being afraid all the time." "You will. It takes time, but you will." They sat like that for a long time, hands linked across the table, until the storm passed and the night grew quiet except for the drip of water from the eaves. Finally, Teresa pulled her hand away, though it took all her willpower. "I should go to bed. Morning comes early." Nathan nodded, not trying to hold on to her. "Sleep well, Teresa." It was the first time he'd used her first name without the formal miss, and the intimacy of it made her breath catch. She whispered goodnight and fled to her room, her heart racing. That night, she slipped the wedding ring off her finger for the first time since Victor had put it there 3 years ago and tucked it into the bottom of her carpet bag. She wasn't ready to throw it away entirely, not when Victor might still find her and she might need proof of her marriage. But she didn't want to wear it anymore, didn't want to carry that weight on her hand. She fell asleep feeling lighter than she had in years. The summer heat gave way gradually to the cooler temperatures of autumn, and Teresa continued to settle into life at the ranch. The work was hard but satisfying, and she found herself actually enjoying the physical labor of cooking and cleaning. Her body grew stronger, the constant fear that had kept her thin and anxious began to ease, and she started sleeping through the night without nightmares. The men treated her with respect and genuine affection, like she was a little sister or a favorite aunt, despite her being not much older than some of them. Diego became a particular friend, teaching her Spanish words and telling her stories about growing up in Mexico. Thomas and William, who were brothers, made her laugh with their constant bickering. Jesse, the youngest at 21, reminded her of a puppy in his enthusiasm for everything, but it was Nathan who occupied most of her thoughts. She couldn't help but notice the way he moved, efficient and graceful despite his size. She found herself watching his hands as he worked, strong and capable whether he was mending a fence or gentling a skittish horse. She loved the sound of his laugh, deep and genuine, and the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled. She caught herself making his favorite foods just to see the pleasure on his face when he ate. And she saw the way he looked at her when he thought she wasn't paying attention, with a hunger that had nothing to do with the food on the table. The tension between them grew like a living thing, stretching taut whenever they were in the same room. Neither of them acknowledged it, but everyone else on the ranch noticed. Diego gave Nathan knowing looks and made comments in Spanish that made the other men laugh. Teresa pretended not to understand, though her grasp of the language was improving daily. One late October afternoon, Teresa was in the kitchen preparing supper when she heard horses approaching at speed. Her heart jumped into her throat, old fears rising instantly. She moved to the window and saw Nathan and Diego riding hard toward the house, their faces serious. They dismounted quickly and strode into the house. Nathan's eyes immediately found Teresa. "We've got trouble." There are 3 men in town asking questions about a woman matching your description. They showed up this morning and have been going door to door. Teresa felt the blood drain from her face. Victor, your husband, or men he hired, he's wealthy and he has connections. He wouldn't come himself, he'd send people to find me. Nathan's jaw tightened. How bad is this going to get? I don't know. He considers me his property. He'll want me back, and he doesn't care what he has to do to make that happen. Diego swore in Spanish. What do you want to do, Nathan? Nathan looked at Teresa, his expression fierce. What do you want to do? This is your choice. We can hide you, send you further west, or we can face this head-on. But I need to know what you want. Teresa's hands were shaking, but she forced herself to think clearly. She was tired of running, tired of being afraid. I won't go back to him. I'd rather die than go back. That's not going to happen, Nathan said flatly. You're not going back and you're not dying. We're going to handle this. How? Nathan exchanged a look with Diego. I've got some friends in town. The sheriff's a good man, and there are others who don't take kindly to people causing trouble for women. If your husband wants you back, he's going to have to go through the law and through us. He has legal rights, Teresa said, her voice breaking. I'm his wife. The law is on his side. Not in Texas, it isn't. Not if I have anything to say about it. Over the next hour, Nathan and Diego worked out a plan. They would go to town the next morning and talk to the sheriff, warn him that men were looking for Teresa and that she was under Nathan's protection. Meanwhile, Teresa would stay at the ranch with Thomas and William, who were both good shots and loyal to Nathan. Teresa wanted to argue, wanted to face this herself, but she knew she'd be useless in a confrontation with Victor's men. She'd spent 3 years learning to make herself small and invisible around Victor. She didn't know how to fight back, but Nathan did. That evening, after the other men had eaten and retreated to the bunkhouse, Nathan sat with Teresa at the kitchen table. She was too nervous to eat, too frightened to do much of anything except twist her hands together in her lap. Tell me about him, Nathan said quietly. Your husband. Teresa took a shaky breath. His name is Victor Graham. He's a merchant in St. Louis, very successful, very respected in the community. Everyone thinks he's charming and generous. They don't see what he's like behind closed doors. What is he like? Controlling, possessive. He has very specific ideas about how a wife should behave, and when I didn't meet his expectations, he would correct me. She pulled back her left sleeve, revealing the fading bruises on her forearm. This was from disagreeing with him about what dress I should wear to a dinner party. I have worse scars that you can't see. Nathan's expression darkened, fury flashing in his eyes. He beats you, beat. Past tense. I'm not his anymore. Teresa, I need you to understand something. No man has the right to put his hands on a woman in anger, husband or not. What he did to you, what he's still trying to do by chasing you halfway across the country, that's not love. That's not even close to what a marriage should be. I know that now. I didn't know it when I was 18 and alone in the world. He seemed kind at first, protective. By the time I realized what he really was, I was trapped. Nathan reached across the table and took her hand, the gesture becoming familiar between them. You're not trapped anymore, and I swear to you on my life that I won't let him take you back. Teresa felt tears slip down her cheeks. Why? Why do you care so much? I'm just your housekeeper. You know that's not true. Then what am I? Nathan was silent for a long moment, his thumb tracing circles on the back of her hand. Finally, he said, you're the first person in 7 years who's made me want something more than just getting through another day. You're the reason I come back to this house at night instead of sleeping in the bunkhouse. You're the woman I think about when I'm supposed to be working, when I'm lying in bed unable to sleep, when I'm doing just about anything at all. And the thought of someone hurting you, of taking you away, makes me want to burn the world down." Teresa's breath caught. "Nathan, I know you're married. I know I have no right to feel this way, but I can't help it, Teresa. I'm falling in love with you, and I think you might feel the same way about me." "I do," she whispered. "I've been trying not to, but I do. You're everything Victor isn't. You're kind and patient, and you make me feel safe and valued. When I'm with you, I remember what it's like to be happy." Nathan stood and moved around the table, pulling Teresa to her feet. He cupped her face in his hands, his touch gentle despite the calluses on his palms. "I want to kiss you," he said, "but I won't unless you tell me it's what you want too." Teresa knew she should say no. She was still technically married, and kissing Nathan would complicate everything. But she'd spent 3 years doing what she was supposed to do, following rules that had nearly destroyed her. For once, she wanted to do what she wanted. "Kiss me," she said. Nathan's lips met hers softly at first, questioning, giving her time to change her mind. But Teresa wrapped her arms around his neck and kissed him back with 3 years of loneliness and fear and desperate hope. The kiss deepened, became urgent, and Teresa felt something in her chest break open, releasing emotions she'd kept locked away for so long. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Nathan rested his forehead against hers. "I'm going to fix this," he said. "Whatever it takes, I'm going to make sure you're free of him." "How? Divorce is nearly impossible, and even if I could get one, it would destroy my reputation." "Then we'll find another way. But one way or another, you're going to be free. And when you are, if you want me, I'll be here. I want you now. I know. But I'm not going to take advantage of you while you're scared and vulnerable. When we're together, really together, it's going to be because you're free and you choose me with no reservations. You deserve that much." Teresa wanted to argue, wanted to tell him that she was choosing him right now, but she understood what he meant. She was still running, still looking over her shoulder, still wearing the emotional scars of her marriage like chains. Until she was truly free, she couldn't fully give herself to anyone. "Okay," she whispered. "We'll wait. But Nathan, thank you for wanting to fight for me. No one's ever done that before. Then everyone before me was a fool." That night, Teresa lay in bed and let herself imagine a future she'd never dared to dream about. A future where she was free of Victor, where she could walk through the world without fear, where she could wake up next to Nathan every morning and fall asleep in his arms every night. A future where she was simply Teresa, not defined by her past or her mistakes, but by the woman she chose to be. It seemed impossible, but for the first time it also seemed within reach. The next morning, Nathan and Diego rode to town while Teresa tried to keep busy at the ranch. Thomas and William stayed close to the house, their rifles within easy reach, though they tried to act casual about it. Teresa baked bread and cleaned things that didn't need cleaning, anything to keep her hands occupied while her mind raced. They'd been gone for 3 hours when Nathan and Diego finally returned, their faces grim. "Tell me," Teresa said, meeting them at the door. Nathan dismounted and handed his reins to Diego. "The men asking questions are Pinkerton agents hired by your husband. They've been showing a photograph of you around town." Teresa's stomach dropped. "Did anyone tell them about me?" Mrs. Patterson kept her mouth shut, and so did most folks. "But someone at the saloon mentioned that I'd hired a woman matching your description to work at my ranch. The agents are planning to ride out here tomorrow." "What are we going to do?" "We're going to tell them the truth. You're working for me. You're an adult woman making your own choices, and unless they have a warrant for your arrest, they have no authority to take you anywhere." "But I'm his wife. He has legal rights." Nathan's expression hardened. "I talked to the sheriff and to a lawyer in town. Texas law says that even though you're married, You have the right to live separately from your husband if he's been cruel to you. If we can prove he abused you, you might be able to get a legal separation or even a divorce on grounds of cruelty. Prove it how? I don't have witnesses. He was always careful to hurt me where it wouldn't show, and when it did show, I lied and said I'd fallen or had an accident. You have your testimony, and you have me and Diego and the other men who can testify to your state when you arrived, how frightened you were. And if your husband or his agents threaten you in front of witnesses, that would help your case too. Teresa wanted to feel hopeful, but she knew Victor. He wouldn't threaten her in front of witnesses. He'd be charming and concerned, playing the role of the worried husband trying to bring his confused wife home. He was good at that, at making her look like the unreasonable one. "You don't understand," she said. "Victor is very convincing. He'll make it seem like I'm unstable, like I ran away for no reason. He'll make people feel sorry for him and suspicious of me." "Let him try," Nathan said. "But he's not taking you anywhere unless you choose to go, and you're not going to choose that, are you?" "Never." "Then we'll handle whatever comes." The next day dawned clear and cold, the kind of autumn morning that promised winter wasn't far off. Teresa dressed carefully in her most modest dress and pinned her hair up neatly, wanting to look respectable and in control. She helped prepare breakfast for the men, though her hands shook so badly she nearly dropped a pan of biscuits. Nathan stayed close to her all morning, a steady presence that helped keep her panic at bay. Diego and the other men went about their usual work, but stayed within earshot of the house, ready to come if needed. The Pinkerton agents arrived around noon, 3 men on horseback riding up to the house with an air of official authority. Nathan went out to meet them while Teresa watched from the window, her heart hammering against her ribs. The men dismounted, and one of them, a tall man with a mustache and a badge pinned to his vest, stepped forward. Teresa couldn't hear what was being said, but she saw Nathan's posture stiffen and his expression darken. Diego moved to stand beside him, a united front. After several minutes of conversation, Nathan turned and gestured for Teresa to come outside. She took a deep breath, squared her shoulders, and walked out onto the porch. The lead agent looked at her with sharp eyes that seemed to catalog every detail. "Mrs. Graham," Teresa forced herself to meet his gaze. "My name is Teresa Grant. Grant was your maiden name. You're legally Teresa Graham, married to Victor Graham of St. Louis. Is that correct?" "I was married to him, yes." "Your husband has been very worried about you. He hired us to find you and bring you home safely. This is my home now. I'm not going back to St. Louis." The agent's expression didn't change. "Mrs. Graham, your husband has every legal right to expect his wife to reside with him. You left without explanation or warning, taking money that didn't belong to you. The money was from my household allowance. It belonged to me as much as it belonged to him. That's a matter for the law to decide. The fact remains that you're his wife and he wants you to come home. We've been hired to escort you back." Nathan stepped forward, his presence imposing. "And I'm telling you that Miss Grant is under my protection, and she's not going anywhere unless she chooses to. You have no warrant, no legal authority to force her to do anything. She's an adult woman with the right to make her own decisions." The agent turned his attention to Nathan, sizing him up. "You're Nathan Sawyer, correct? The owner of this ranch?" "That's right." "And what is your relationship to Mrs. Graham?" "She works for me. I provide her with room, board, and a salary in exchange for cooking and housekeeping." "I see." "And there's nothing else to your relationship?" Nathan's jaw tightened. "What are you implying?" "I'm implying that a married woman living on a ranch with 5 men and no other female company raises questions about propriety." Mr. Graham is concerned that his wife may have been led astray by unscrupulous individuals taking advantage of her confused state. Teresa felt rage bubble up inside her, burning away the fear. I'm not confused and I wasn't led astray. I left my husband because he beats me. Because he controlled every aspect of my life and made me feel like a prisoner in my own home. Because staying with him would have eventually killed me. Coming here was the sanest decision I've ever made. The agent's expression flickered, something that might have been sympathy crossing his face briefly before his professional mask returned. Those are serious accusations, Mrs. Graham. Do you have proof? I have scars. I have 3 years of memories of being hit and pushed and choked. I have the terror I still feel at the thought of going back to him. If that's not proof enough, I don't know what is. Unfortunately, your testimony alone isn't sufficient to violate the legal bonds of marriage. If you want to pursue divorce or legal separation, you'll need to do so through proper legal channels. In the meantime, your husband has the right to request your return. Request, Nathan said sharply. Not demand, not force. She has the right to refuse. The agent looked between them, clearly weighing his options. Finally, he said, "We're not going to drag Mrs. Graham back to St. Louis against her will, but I am obligated to tell her that her husband is coming here himself. He left St. Louis 3 days ago and should arrive in Presidio by the end of the week. He wants to speak with his wife personally and attempt to reconcile." Teresa felt her knees go weak. Nathan's hand immediately went to her elbow, steadying her. "She doesn't have to see him if she doesn't want to," Nathan said. "Actually, as her legal husband, he does have the right to speak with her. We can't force her to return with him, but we also can't prevent him from attempting to exercise his marital rights." "What does that mean?" Teresa asked, though she was afraid she already knew. The agent looked uncomfortable. "It means that if you refuse to return with him voluntarily, he may pursue legal action to force compliance. He could have you declared mentally incompetent and have you institutionalized for your own protection. Or he could press charges for theft of marital property. There are legal avenues available to him." Teresa felt the world tilting. Victor was coming. Victor would be in Presidio in days, and he would use every trick and manipulation he knew to drag her back, and he had the law on his side. "Get off my property," Nathan said, his voice cold as winter. "You've delivered your message. Now leave." The agents mounted their horses, but the lead agent paused before riding away. "For what it's worth, Mrs. Graham, I've been doing this job for 15 years. I can usually tell when someone is lying or exaggerating. I don't think you are. I hope you find a way out of this situation that doesn't end badly for you." Then they were gone, leaving Teresa standing on the porch with Nathan's hand still supporting her elbow and her entire world crashing down around her ears. "I have to run again," she said, her voice hollow. "I have to leave before he gets here." "No. Nathan, you heard what he said. Victor can have me institutionalized. He can have me arrested. He has all the power and I have none. Running is the only option. Running just delays the inevitable. He'll keep chasing you, Teresa. He'll find you again and again until you're too tired to keep running. The only way to end this is to face him." "How? How can I face him when he holds all the cards?" Nathan turned her to face him, his hands on her shoulders, his eyes fierce. "We're going to fight him with the truth. We're going to build a case for divorce based on cruelty. We're going to make sure everyone in Presidio knows what kind of man he is. And we're going to show him that you're not alone anymore, that you have people who will stand with you. Why would anyone believe me over him? Because I'll make them believe you. Because Diego and the men will testify for you. Because Mrs. Patterson and the other people in town, who have seen you recover from whatever hell you were living will testify for you. And because when Victor gets here and tries to bully you into submission, we're going to make sure there are witnesses to document his behavior." Teresa wanted to believe him, but hope felt dangerous. What if it doesn't work? What if he wins? Then we'll figure out something else. But I promise you, Teresa, you're not going back to him. Even if we have to leave Texas and start over somewhere else, even if we have to fight this battle for the rest of our lives, you're not going back. Teresa threw her arms around Nathan's neck and held on tight, drawing strength from his solid presence. He wrapped his arms around her, one hand cradling the back of her head, and she felt safe despite the storm that was coming. "I'm so scared," she whispered. "I know, but you're also brave. You survived 3 years with him and you found the courage to leave. You can survive this too." Over the next 3 days, Nathan and Teresa prepared for Victor's arrival. They rode into Presidio and met with Sheriff Tom Reynolds, who listened to Teresa's story with a sympathetic ear and promised to keep a close watch on the situation. They met with a lawyer named Henry Foster, who explained the difficult path to divorce, but agreed to take Teresa's case if she wanted to pursue it. Mrs. Patterson offered to testify about Teresa's condition when she'd first arrived in Presidio, how frightened and hurt she'd seemed. Several other townspeople who'd interacted with Teresa also offered their support, moved by her quiet courage and Nathan's obvious devotion to her. Teresa also made a difficult decision. She sat down and wrote out a detailed account of her marriage to Victor, documenting every incident of abuse she could remember. The dates, the injuries, the reasons he'd given for punishing her. It was painful to relive those memories, but Nathan sat with her while she wrote, a steady presence that kept her from falling apart. When it was done, she had 5 pages of testimony that painted a damning picture of her marriage. Henry Foster read it and said it was the strongest foundation for a divorce case he'd seen in years. "If we can get independent corroboration of even a fraction of this, you'll have a solid case," he said. "The problem is that divorce cases take time, sometimes years. And in the meantime, your husband can make things very difficult for you." "What are my options?" Teresa asked. "You can file for legal separation, which is faster than divorce and would give you the right to live apart from him. You can pursue divorce on grounds of cruelty. Or you can try to negotiate with your husband directly, see if he'll agree to an annulment or an amicable separation. Victor will never agree to that. He'd see it as a loss of control. Then we'll have to fight." Victor arrived in Presidio on a Friday afternoon, 4 days after the Pinkerton agents had come to the ranch. Teresa heard about it from Diego, who'd been in town and saw the fancy coach pull up to the hotel. He'd ridden back to the ranch at full speed to warn them. "He's not what I expected," Diego said, looking troubled. "He looks like a gentleman, well-dressed, polite. He was charming to the hotel clerk." "That's how he operates," Teresa said bitterly. "He shows everyone the perfect exterior while hiding the monster underneath." Nathan had insisted that Teresa not face Victor alone, and she'd agreed. The thought of being in the same room with her husband made her physically ill. They decided to stay at the ranch and let Victor come to them, which would put Teresa on familiar ground and ensure there were witnesses to any interaction. Victor didn't keep them waiting long. The next morning, his coach pulled up to the ranch house, driven by a man Teresa didn't recognize. Victor stepped out and Teresa felt her stomach clench at the sight of him. He looked exactly as she remembered. Tall and distinguished, with silver hair and a neatly trimmed beard. He wore an expensive suit and carried a walking stick with a silver handle. He looked like what he was, a successful merchant and respected member of society. He looked nothing like a man who beat his wife, Nathan and Diego flanked Teresa as Victor approached the house. Thomas, William, and Jesse were nearby, ostensibly working but clearly ready to intervene if necessary. "Teresa," Victor said, his voice warm and concerned. "Thank God I've found you. I've been so worried." Teresa forced herself to stand straight to not show fear. "Victor, what are you doing out here, darling? When you disappeared, I thought something terrible had happened to you." "I've been frantic. I left because I needed to leave. I'm not coming back with you." Victor's expression shifted just for a moment, showing the coldness underneath. Then the concerned husband mask was back in place. "You're not well, Teresa. Clearly, you're confused. Whatever these people have told you, whatever ideas they've put in your head, they're not true. You belong at home with me." "I'm not confused. I'm clearer now than I've been in 3 years. I left because you hurt me, Victor, because living with you was destroying me." Victor looked at Nathan and Diego, then back at Teresa. "We shouldn't discuss private marital matters in front of strangers, darling. Let's go somewhere we can talk alone." "No. Anything you have to say to me, you can say in front of witnesses." Victor's jaw tightened. "Teresa, I'm trying to be patient with you, but you're making this very difficult. You're my wife. You took vows before God to obey me. This rebellious behavior is unacceptable. What's unacceptable is hitting your wife because dinner isn't to your liking. What's unacceptable is controlling every aspect of another person's life until they feel like they can't breathe. What's unacceptable is terrorizing someone who's supposed to be your partner. I never hit you. You're being dramatic as usual. If I disciplined you occasionally, it was for your own good to help you become a better wife." Nathan stepped forward, and Teresa saw the fury in his eyes. "Discipline? You call beating a woman discipline? You're lucky I don't shoot you where you stand." Victor's attention shifted to Nathan, assessing him. "And who are you, the man who's been harboring my wife? Do you have any idea the legal trouble you're in? You're interfering in a marriage which is illegal. You could be charged with alienation of affection." "Try it," Nathan said flatly. "I'll happily go before a judge and explain that I gave a terrified woman shelter after she fled an abusive husband. See how that plays in court." Victor's mask slipped entirely, revealing the cold rage underneath. "Teresa, you have until tomorrow morning to come to your senses and return to the hotel with me. After that, I'm filing legal action to have you remanded to an institution for the mentally incompetent. I have doctors who will testify that your behavior indicates severe mental distress. You'll spend the rest of your life in an asylum unless you cooperate." Teresa felt ice in her veins. He would do it. Victor would absolutely have her locked away rather than let her be free. "You can't do that," she said, but her voice shook. "I can and I will. You're my wife. I have every legal right to determine your care and treatment. If you're too ill to fulfill your marital duties, then you need to be somewhere you can receive proper medical attention." "I've already filed for divorce on grounds of cruelty," Teresa said, forcing strength into her voice. "I've documented every instance of abuse. I have witnesses prepared to testify. You're not going to win this, Victor." Victor's expression turned vicious. "You think some frontier lawyer can help you? You think these cowboys and their testimony will mean anything to a judge? I have money, Teresa. I have influence. I'll drag this case out for years if I have to, and in the meantime you'll be locked in an institution. Is that really what you want? What I want is for you to leave me alone, to let me go and move on with your life. You're mine, Teresa. You will always be mine. I don't give up what belongs to me." Nathan moved then, putting himself between Teresa and Victor. "Get off my property, now, before I forget I'm a civilized man." Victor looked at Nathan with contempt. "You think you're protecting her. All you're doing is making this harder for her." She'll pay for your interference when she comes back to me. She's not coming back to you. We'll see." Victor returned to his coach, but before climbing in, he looked back at Teresa. "Tomorrow morning, Teresa, make the right choice." Then he was gone, leaving Teresa shaking and terrified. Nathan immediately pulled her into his arms, holding her tight while she trembled. "He's bluffing. He's trying to scare you into submission. It's what bullies do when they start losing control. What if he's not bluffing? What if he really can have me institutionalized? Then we'll fight that too. But I don't think it's as easy as he's making it sound. Mr. Foster said that to have someone committed against their will, you need testimony from multiple doctors and proof of danger to themselves or others. Victor can't just snap his fingers and have you locked away. But he has money. He can buy doctors who'll say whatever he wants them to say." Diego spoke up. "Then we get our own doctors. We show that you're completely sane and capable. We prove he's the dangerous one." Teresa wanted to believe them, but years of Victor's conditioning made it hard to see any path forward that didn't end with him winning. He always won. That was what he'd taught her, what he'd proven again and again. That night, Teresa barely slept. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling, trying to think of options. Running seemed more appealing by the hour, but Nathan was right that Victor would just chase her again. Fighting seemed hopeless when Victor had the law and money on his side. Going back to him was unthinkable. She was trapped, and she hated the familiar feeling of helplessness. Just before dawn, she got up and dressed, intending to make breakfast for the men even though her hands wouldn't stop shaking. She found Nathan already in the kitchen, dressed, and clearly having not slept either. "I've been thinking," he said without preamble. "There might be another way." "What way?" Nathan looked uncomfortable, like he was about to suggest something he wasn't sure was right. "If you were married to someone else, Victor's claim on you would be void." "You can't be married to two people at once." Teresa stared at him. "But I am married to him. I can't just marry someone else." "You could if your marriage to Victor was invalid. If we could prove there were grounds for annulment, that would dissolve the marriage immediately without needing a divorce." "On what grounds?" "The marriage was legal. I was of age. I consented. There were witnesses." "Did you know what kind of man he was when you married him?" "Did he misrepresent himself?" "He lied about who he was, but I don't know if that's grounds for annulment." Nathan paced the kitchen, thinking. Mr. Foster mentioned fraud as potential grounds for annulment. If Victor deliberately misrepresented his character and intentions to induce you to marry him, that could be considered fraud. But how would we prove that? Your testimony. Documentation of the abuse starting immediately or shortly after the marriage. Character witnesses who can testify to the difference between Victor's public persona and his private behavior. Teresa felt a flicker of hope. Would it work? I don't know, but it's worth asking Mr. Foster about. An annulment would be faster than a divorce and would mean you were never legally married. It would erase Victor's claim entirely. They rode into town as soon as it was light enough to see, leaving Diego in charge of the ranch. Henry Foster was surprised to see them so early, but invited them into his office and listened carefully as Nathan explained his idea. The lawyer was thoughtful. Annulment based on fraud is difficult to prove but not impossible. The key would be showing that Victor deliberately deceived Teresa about fundamental aspects of his character, and that she wouldn't have married him had she known the truth. Given the extensive abuse documented in Teresa's statement, we could argue that Victor concealed his violent and controlling nature to induce her into marriage. "How long would it take?" Teresa asked. "Still several months, probably. We'd need to file a petition, gather evidence, have a hearing. But it would be faster than divorce, and if successful, it would be more definitive. The marriage would be declared void from the beginning, as if it never existed. What happens in the meantime? Victor said he's going to have me institutionalized. He can certainly try, but I can file an injunction preventing him from taking any action against you while the annulment case is pending. It's not perfect protection, but it would make things more difficult for him. Nathan leaned forward. How fast can you file the paperwork? I can have the annulment petition ready by this afternoon and file it with the court tomorrow. The injunction might take a few more days. Do it, Teresa said. File everything. I want to fight him properly. After leaving the lawyer's office, Nathan and Teresa walked through town, and Nathan suddenly stopped in front of a small church. Marry me, he said. Teresa's heart skipped. What? I know the timing is terrible. I know you're still legally married to Victor, and we have a long fight ahead of us. But when this is over, when you're free, marry me. Be my wife for real, the way marriage is supposed to be. Build a life with me. Nathan, you can't possibly want to tie yourself to me and all my problems. Your problems are temporary, you're forever. At least I hope you are. He took her hands in his. I love you, Teresa. I loved you before I knew your name, before I knew your story. I love your courage and your strength and the way you make the house feel like a home. I love waking up knowing you'll be there. I want to give you everything Victor never did. Safety, respect, partnership, love. I want to grow old with you. Teresa felt tears streaming down her face. I love you too. I've been trying not to because it felt too soon, too complicated. But I do. I love you so much. Then marry me. Not today, not tomorrow, but someday soon. Say yes and give me something to fight for. Yes, Teresa whispered. Yes, when I'm free, I'll marry you. Nathan kissed her right there on the street, not caring who saw, and Teresa kissed him back with all the love and hope and desperate longing in her heart. When they finally pulled apart, they were both grinning like fools. We're going to get through this, Nathan said. And then we're going to have the life we both deserve. The next few weeks were a blur of legal proceedings and tension. Henry Foster filed the annulment petition and the injunction, which temporarily prevented Victor from taking any action against Teresa. Victor, predictably, fought back with his own lawyers and his own petitions, trying to have Teresa remanded to his custody. The case attracted attention in Presidio, and opinion was divided. Some people thought Teresa was a scandalous woman who'd abandoned her husband for a cowboy. Others, particularly women who'd seen Teresa around town and heard whispers of abuse, were firmly on her side. Nathan stood by Teresa through all of it, accompanying her to every court appearance, making sure she was never alone with Victor or his lawyers. Diego and the other men testified about Teresa's condition when she'd first arrived, and Mrs. Patterson gave a powerful testimony about seeing bruises on Teresa's arms and the fear in her eyes. Victor played his part perfectly. The concerned husband worried about his mentally unstable wife. He brought in a doctor from St. Louis who testified that Teresa had always been emotionally fragile and prone to hysteria. He suggested that her accusations of abuse were delusions brought on by feminine mental weakness. It made Teresa furious, and that fury gave her strength. She testified clearly and firmly about the specifics of Victor's abuse, providing dates and details that couldn't be dismissed as delusions. She showed the court scars that corroborated her testimony, and she looked the judge in the eye and said that she would rather die than return to Victor Graham. The judge, a stern man named William Cooper, listened to everything and took several days to consider his ruling. When they returned to court for his decision, Teresa was shaking with nerves, holding Nathan's hand so tightly her knuckles were white. Judge Cooper looked at all the parties and said, "I've reviewed the evidence and testimony in this case very carefully. This court has rarely seen such detailed and disturbing allegations of marital abuse. While Mr. Graham presents well and has many character witnesses attesting to his good reputation, Mrs. Graham's testimony is specific, consistent, and corroborated by physical evidence and witness accounts of her condition upon arrival in Presidio. Victor's lawyer started to object, but the judge held up his hand. I'm also troubled by Mr. Graham's immediate threat to have his wife institutionalized when she refused to return with him. That suggests a controlling nature consistent with Mrs. Graham's allegations. Based on all the evidence, I'm granting the annulment petition. The marriage between Victor Graham and Teresa Grant is hereby declared void on grounds of fraud and duress. The marriage is deemed to have never legally existed. Teresa felt like she couldn't breathe. What does that mean? It means you're free, Henry Foster said, his face breaking into a huge smile. You're not married to him anymore. You never were, according to the law. He has no claim on you. Teresa turned to Nathan and saw joy and relief mirrored on his face. She threw her arms around him, sobbing, and he held her tight while the courtroom erupted in noise around them. Victor's face was purple with rage. This is absurd. You can't just dissolve a legal marriage because a woman gets scared and runs away. I'll appeal this decision to the territorial court. Judge Cooper fixed Victor with a cold stare. You're welcome to appeal, Mr. Graham, but in the meantime, you are ordered to stay at least 500 yards away from Teresa Grant at all times. If you violate this order, I'll have you arrested. Furthermore, I'm finding you in contempt of court for your continued harassment of Miss Grant during these proceedings. You're fined $500 and ordered to leave Presidio within 24 hours. This court is adjourned. As the judge left, Victor stared at Teresa with such hatred that she instinctively stepped closer to Nathan. But the hatred was impotent now. Victor had lost, and they both knew it. This isn't over, Victor hissed. Yes, it is, Teresa said, finding her voice. I'm free of you. I'm not Teresa Graham anymore. I never was. You have no power over me. Nathan stepped forward, his presence menacing. You heard the judge. You have 24 hours to get out of town. I suggest you start packing. Victor left the courtroom, his expensive shoes clicking on the wooden floor, and Teresa felt 3 years of fear and pain leave with him. She was free. Truly, legally free. Outside the courthouse, people congratulated them. Mrs. Patterson hugged Teresa and told her how proud she was of her courage. Sheriff Reynolds shook Nathan's hand and promised to make sure Victor left town without causing trouble. Diego and the men were grinning, clearly delighted with the outcome. Let's go home, Nathan said softly to Teresa. Our home. The word home had never sounded so beautiful. Victor left Presidio the next day, and as far as Teresa knew, he never filed an appeal. Maybe he realized he'd lost and wasn't going to waste more time and money on a woman who'd never really been his. Maybe his pride wouldn't allow him to admit defeat publicly. Whatever the reason, they never heard from him again. Teresa moved through the next few weeks in a daze of relief and joy. The weight she'd been carrying for years was gone, and she felt lighter, freer, more herself than she'd ever been. Nathan gave her space to process everything, never pushing, always patient. But the heat between them that had been simmering for months was building to a boil, and they both knew it was only a matter of time. One evening in late November, about a month after the annulment was granted, Teresa was cleaning up after supper when Nathan came up behind her at the wash basin. He'd sent the other men to the bunkhouse early, and they were alone in the house. Teresa, he said softly. She turned to face him, her hands still wet from washing dishes. Yes, you're free now. You've had time to think, to figure out who you are without Victor's shadow over you. So I'm going to ask you again. Will you marry me? Not someday, not eventually. Soon. As soon as we can arrange it. Teresa cupped his face in her wet hands, not caring that she was getting him damp. "Yes, tomorrow if you want. I don't need more time to think. I know what I want and it's you. It's always been you." Nathan kissed her then, deep and passionate, and Teresa felt heat flood through her body. This kiss was different from the others they'd shared. This was the kiss of two people who knew they were going to be together, who didn't have to hold back anymore. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Nathan said, "I want you to be sure. I want you to know what you're getting. I'm just a cowboy with a ranch. I'm not rich, I'm not fancy, I'm not going to be able to give you the kind of life you had in St. Louis. The life I had in St. Louis was a prison. What you're offering me is freedom and love and partnership. That's worth more than all of Victor's money ever was. I'll work hard to make you happy. I'll respect you and protect you and love you for the rest of my life. I know you will, and I'll do the same for you." They were married 2 weeks later in the small church in Presidio, with Diego as best man and Mrs. Patterson as matron of honor. The whole town turned out for the wedding, and Teresa wore a simple cream-colored dress that Mrs. Patterson helped her sew. She felt beautiful, not because of the dress, but because of the way Nathan looked at her when she walked down the aisle, like she was the most precious thing in the world. They spoke their vows in front of God and the community, promising to love and honor each other for better or worse, in sickness and health, as long as they both lived. This time, Teresa meant every word with her whole heart. Nathan slipped a simple gold band on her finger, replacing the ring Victor had given her, and when the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Nathan kissed her tenderly while everyone cheered. The reception was held at Mrs. Patterson's boarding house, with food and music and dancing that lasted well into the night. Teresa danced with Nathan, with Diego, with all the men from the ranch, with the sheriff and Henry Foster, and what felt like half of Presidio. She laughed until her sides hurt and felt joy bubble up inside her like champagne. When they finally left the party and rode back to the ranch, just the two of them in the wagon under a canopy of stars, Teresa felt like she was floating. "Happy?" Nathan asked, his arm around her shoulders. "Happier than I knew it was possible to be." At the ranch, Nathan carried her over the threshold, making her laugh and protest that she wasn't a delicate flower. But she loved the gesture, loved the symbolism of starting their life together properly. Their wedding night was everything Teresa had hoped for, and nothing like her experiences with Victor. Nathan was gentle and patient, making sure she was comfortable, asking permission before each new touch. He made love to her slowly, worshipfully, like she was something precious to be treasured rather than something to be used. Afterward, lying in Nathan's arms in the bed they would share for the rest of their lives, Teresa felt tears slip down her face. "Did I hurt you?" Nathan asked immediately, concern in his voice. "No, these are happy tears. I just never thought I could have this. Love without fear, intimacy without pain. You've given me something I thought was impossible." Nathan kissed her forehead. "You've given me the same thing. A reason to be more than just a man surviving day to day. You've given me a future, Teresa, a family, a real home." "We're going to be so happy," Teresa whispered. "We already are." They fell asleep wrapped around each other, safe and loved and home. The years that followed were the happiest of Teresa's life. She and Nathan built their life together brick by brick, day by day. The ranch prospered, growing from 200 head of cattle to nearly 500. They expanded the house, adding more rooms for the family they hoped to have. Teresa threw herself into ranch life, learning to ride horses properly and even helping with roundups when they needed extra hands. She maintained the garden that she'd planted behind the house, growing vegetables and herbs and flowers. She became known in Presidio for her cooking, and people would ask Nathan if his wife might be willing to cater for special occasions. Diego remained foreman and became like a brother to both of them. The younger cowboys came and went, but Thomas, William, and Jesse stayed on, eventually bringing wives of their own to the ranch. The property began to feel like a real community, multiple families working together toward common goals. Teresa never heard from Victor again. She learned through mutual acquaintances in St. Louis that he'd remarried within a year of their annulment, choosing another young woman to try to control. Teresa felt sorry for the new Mrs. Graham, but knew there was nothing she could do except pray. The woman found her own courage to leave. 2 years after their wedding, Teresa discovered she was pregnant. She told Nathan over breakfast one morning, watching his face transform from surprise to wonder to pure joy. "A baby," he said, like he couldn't quite believe it. "We're going to have a baby. Are you happy?" Happy doesn't even begin to cover it. "Teresa, you've given me everything. Everything I didn't even know I wanted." Their son was born in the spring of 1881, a healthy boy with Nathan's dark hair and Teresa's green eyes. They named him Samuel Nathan Sawyer, and he was perfect. Nathan was a devoted father from the moment. Samuel was placed in his arms, protective and gentle and completely besotted. Teresa loved watching Nathan with their son, seeing the tenderness in her strong husband as he cradled the baby or walked the floor with him at night when Samuel was fussy. This was what family should be, she thought. Love and patience and partnership. 2 years later, they had a daughter they named Rose Lily. And then 2 years after that, another son they named James Diego, honoring Diego's friendship and loyalty over the years. Their house filled with noise and laughter and love. Everything Teresa had dreamed of during those dark years in St. Louis. She sometimes thought about the woman she'd been when she'd stumbled off that stagecoach in Presidio, terrified and broken and certain she'd never be whole again. That woman felt like a stranger now, someone from another lifetime. The Teresa who'd been married to Victor Graham had died when Judge Cooper granted the annulment. The Teresa who'd married Nathan Sawyer had been born free and had chosen her own path. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Nathan took Teresa up to a spot on their property that overlooked the entire ranch. They stood together watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink and purple, while their children played nearby under Diego's watchful eye. "Do you ever regret it?" Nathan asked. "Choosing this life, marrying a cowboy, living out here in the middle of nowhere?" Teresa looked at the land they'd built together, the house filled with love and children, the man who'd given her everything that mattered. Not for a single second. "This is where I belong, with you, with our family. This is home." Nathan pulled her close and kissed her temple. "I promised you a future worth living. Did I deliver?" Teresa thought about the past 10 years, all the joy and love and simple everyday happiness she'd found. She thought about her children growing up free and safe, learning what real love looked like from parents who cherished them. She thought about the community they'd built, the friends they'd made, the life they'd created from nothing but hope and determination. "You gave me more than a future worth living," she said. "You gave me a life beyond my wildest dreams. You gave me love and freedom and a family. You gave me myself back. So yes, Nathan Sawyer, you more than delivered on your promise." As the sun sank below the horizon and the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, Teresa and Nathan stood together, hands linked, surrounded by everything they'd built and everyone they loved. She'd run from her past and found a cowboy who'd promised her a future. Together, they'd built something more precious than gold, a love that would last all the days of their lives and beyond. The end.